Well, one thing we are good at is winning the die roll, and this hand is keepable. Magmatic Insight is a card that can be a little bit of a liability. There's 3 copies in the deck because it works really well with your Drownyard Temple, your Goggles, and Jorian, but when you don't have that many lands like in this draw, you can't really afford to cast it early on. So in that way it's a little bit annoying, but it looks like our opponent is starting out with some sort of black-white strategy. But we're just going to go ahead and deploy Thing in the Ice here. And interestingly, we drew another copy of Magmatic Insight, but let's go ahead and run out Jorian. If we draw a land, we can probably just go ahead and now afford to discard lands to these Magmatic Insights and try to chain them together to either remove counters on Thing in the Ice or get this Jorian going. It's pretty likely our opponent is going to Silk Wrap, yeah, the Jorian. That was the more threatening card of the two because Thing in the Ice still has 4 counters on it, and so our opponent's going to have some time to deal with Thing in the Ice. But, yeah, let's just go ahead and play Jace now that we've drawn it. We're still looking for lands in order to be able to discard them to Magmatic Insight. And we'll see what the play is here. It's going to be Gideon. Gideon's pretty annoying. And let's just go ahead and untap. We still have this Lightning Axe available to us. So let's go ahead here and Tormenting Voice, discarding Fiery Temper. We could also loot and discard Fiery Temper. So we've got a couple different options in terms of the Fiery Temper. Maybe we should just loot first with Jace just to see what we find. Alright, let's do that. Okay, so, yeah, I think that we just want to go ahead and discard this Fiery Temper here. And we can go ahead and point it at the Gideon. Thing in the Ice is also becoming more threatening now at this point. I kind of like actually just playing Tormenting Voice and discarding Magmatic Insight. Yeah, let's go ahead and go with that line. And now we have plenty of lands. Let's just go ahead and play a tap land though, and we're going to just have to ship it back and see what our opponent has up their sleeve. Thing in the Ice is threatening to flip, which is definitely should be a legitimate concern for our opponent. Omnixilus, though, is bad news because it can take out the Thing in the Ice. That is what's going to happen. And it looks like our opponent is deciding to get aggressive here. So our draw step was Fiery Impulse. Okay. So our opponent has 2 pretty threatening Planeswalkers out against us. The play that I actually like the most here is just playing a land and getting rid of the Omnixilus. That way we can hold our Jace back for potential blocks. So yeah, we're not in a great spot here, but let's go ahead, get that Omnixilus off the table, and just pass the turn back. So our opponent's going for Anguished Unmaking, but now in response, we can go ahead and loot and flip Jace. So the Anguished Unmaking forced us to flip Jace, and our opponent can now attack Jace with Gideon to take out our Jace. It's unclear, though, if that exchange was worth it for our opponent, but either way, we're definitely not in a great spot. Okay, Transgress the Mind is going to completely miss. We don't have any targets for that card in our hand. So our opponent's already activated Gideon. I'm not really liking the sequencing. And, okay, so now our opponent's actually just going to take Jace out. This line doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and here's why. We can just go ahead and Fiery Impulse away the ally, and now we can animate our land and take out Jace. So, looks like Jace is off the table. And we'll see what our opponent wants to do here, or if there's another big play waiting. Alternatively, yeah, it looks like just activating Shambling Vent, so we're not out of things here. We've had a lot of our threats dealt with, but still in the game. Let's go ahead and play Magmatic Insight now. Try to gas back up a little bit. And it may be that we want to start getting a little bit aggressive with our land because we don't have that much we can do, unfortunately. So we're just going to go ahead and animate here. And if our opponent is attacking us with Shambling Vent, that means they're not activating Westvale Abbey. We also have Fiery Impulse in hand to deal with one Shambling Vent. But Read the Bones is pretty good because our opponent gets to see a bunch of cards. So I wouldn't be surprised if they found another threat. Yep, there it is. There's Gideon. But what we can do here is we can just go ahead and Fiery Impulse away the token and attack Gideon like we did earlier with our land here. We want to leave up 2 red. So you can see how Gideon can be pretty good, but other times it doesn't match up that well against what we're trying to do. So we'll see what our opponent does here. It's going to be more loss of life with Read the Bones. But it looks like our opponent found at least one card they wanted to put on top. These types of decks, when you see Westvale Abbey, this deck has been pretty popular on Magic Online. It likely also has Secure the Waste. So it does look like our opponent's going to go ahead and fire up a Shambling Vent. So we can go ahead and Lightning Axe it here. And we can, if we want to, we can just go ahead and discard the Fiery Temper to the Lightning Axe, or we can discard the land. Between those two options, I think we just want to go ahead and discard the land and save the Fiery Temper. So let's do that. And there is a Goggles. Goggles is a pretty good draw for us. So we have the option of what we want to do here. We can either play the Goggles, or we can just continue the beatdown, essentially. So both options are pretty close. I think I like just going ahead and continuing to attack our opponent's life total here. Hopefully we don't get hit with something like a Transgress the Mind type of card. But if our opponent just simply plays a threat, we can maybe race with the Goggles here. Our opponent could also just activate Shambling Vents, but it's going to be Sorin. And Gideon being revealed is quite bad for us. Jace is our draw step, so... This is not a great spot for us, but we can just go ahead and play Goggles and pass the turn, and hopefully we can maybe draw something like a Fall of the Titans on our next draw step, assuming we get another draw step here. And Sorin is just going to reveal a land this time, so we're not going to take damage from it, but that does mean Sorin is up to 8, and we definitely don't want to play our Jace because Sorin can just down tick, and we don't really want our opponent to be gaining life in this spot. So there's one Shambling Vents being fired up. We'll see if our opponent wants to go ahead and activate another vent or just the one. We're most likely going to want to Fiery Temper away the attacking vent, and then we will have another copy of the Fiery Temper. So we do have a number of draws that would be nice. Something like Chandra, any sort of red spell we could potentially use to our advantage. And so, yeah, let's just go ahead and play the Fiery Temper. And we don't really want to redirect damage to Sorin here. We want to just be going after our opponent's life total. So we'll see if our opponent plays another threat or just passes the turn representing a number of different cards. And we're really hoping for something like Fall of the Titans. That's our best draw. Because what we could do is we could play Jace and then copy the Fall of the Titans with Surge. Well, it looks like our opponent's actually playing Gideon here. So that's another threat that we're going to have to try to deal with, and we basically bricked on our draw step. So we don't really have much of a choice. We just have to pass the turn here. It may be that we are going to die here. Transgress is going to be revealed. Gideon is activated, and if our opponent activates a Shambling Vents as well, that's going to be too much because we can activate our land to block the Gideon, but we're still going to take 4. So, all right, fine. We'll go to the next game. So we know, once again, we want to look towards Fevered Visions, especially on the play. So we've been playing against these black-white control-ish decks. So we know we want our counter magic. We know we want Dispel. We know we don't want as much spot removal as is in the main deck. So let's go ahead and chop off some of that stuff. And we can probably just go ahead and board out a copy of Thing in the Ice. This seems like a pretty solid configuration. I actually kind of like Eldrazi Obligator in this matchup as a haste threat. It's pretty good against Gideon, so we can maybe board in one of those. And we'll try this out. Alrighty, here we go. And we're going to have to mulligan. Yep, only one land there. We are playing 26 of them, but sometimes that happens, and we are probably going to have to keep this hand, even though 2 copies of Jorian isn't really what we want. There are only 2 copies total in the deck, and we're going to have to bottom this negate because we're looking for a blue source. So hopefully we can draw out of this situation. Our opponent also took a mulligan, so we're on equal footing in that regard, but if our opponent has lands and we don't, we all know how that goes. Tormenting Voice would be a nice draw step too, because we could use the Tormenting Voice to pitch one of our cards, and that would give us 2 more looks towards finding a land. And it looks like our opponent is most worried about Chandra. And that wasn't the land we really needed. We really are looking for a blue source. We don't actually play that many blue cards. We do play more red sources than blue, and the reason for that is because normally you have something like a Magmatic Insight or a Tormenting Voice that you can use to filter through the deck, but unfortunately here things are not pretty for us. Fiery Temper is not that great, especially if our opponent just simply jams a Gideon once again into play. And there's Read the Bones. Alright, so there is the Tormenting Voice. We can go ahead and cast it, discarding Fiery Temper to at least deal our opponent 3 damage. But we're still looking for a blue source. There is one right there. And we did draw another Chandra, which our opponent may not be anticipating, but if our opponent has something like Omnixilis, that would be bad. Yes, that is Omnixilis, okay. And here we're in a bit of a tough spot, because if we just play a creature here, our opponent can shoot it down with Omnixilis. So we can just hold up negate and pass the turn, which is fine, but it's not really what we want to be doing either. If we had lands this game, we might be able to set up a win with Fall and with Chandra, especially with our opponent losing all this life off of Omnixilis. But we'll see. I mean, if our opponent goes for something like Sorin this turn, that wouldn't be bad for us. We could just play negate. But we're up against 7 cards, and that's a lot of cards that we're gonna have to find our way through. Read the Bones. is a card we can counter right now if we want to. I think we just want to let it resolve, though, just because our opponent's taking 2 more damage off the Read the Bones. And we're still pretty much bricking. Playing a creature here does not seem profitable because of the Ob Nixilis. The Ob Nixilis can just go down 3 to get rid of whatever creature we play, so we're just kind of hoping that we can maybe mise some sort of a win with Chandra, but it seems pretty unlikely at this point that that's going to happen. Alright, Gideon. We are going to have to say no to Gideon. Our opponent's really losing more life from what they're doing than from what we're doing. Let's go ahead and discard one of these Jorians and see if we can find something here. So we found a couple of lands, which is pretty nice. We don't really have a reason to run out a creature into Ob Nixilis, so passing the turn seems just fine here. If our opponent plays an instant, we can dispel it, but more likely than not, it could just be an activation of something like Shambling Vents. That's a lot of cards our opponent has in hand. 9 cards, now down to 8, down to 7, and there is Sorin. So Sorin's going to reveal Gideon, and that's pretty annoying. Let's see what our draw step here is going to be. Actually, it looks like our opponent is going to have to discard, and now we have Fevered Visions, which we can play. We can't play Chandra this turn, but Fevered Visions is a card that could be good here to get through these last couple points of damage. So let's go ahead and play Fevered Visions here. And we don't really want to give our opponent opportunity to gain life with Sorin. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to set up this Fall of the Titans the way we would like to. So that's pretty annoying. Our opponent now can also make the emblem with Ob Nixilis, and it looks like that's actually what's going to happen. And that's pretty good, especially when our opponent's drawing 2 cards per turn. Although, Anguished Unmaking on Fevered Visions, that's pretty interesting because we can go ahead and dispel it. So let's do that. And it's pretty surprising that our opponent is going for Anguished Unmaking here, but Read the Bones is pretty annoying. So this game could just come down to the wire here. And it looks like this is actually going to be an activation of Shambling Vent. Interesting. So our opponent's going to lose 2 from the Fever Visions and go down to 8. But we're still going to have to figure out if we can find a way to deal these last couple points here. Obnixilis is threatening to kill us, essentially. We could play Chandra and essentially bring our opponent down to 2, but then we are gonna have to face the backswing on the Shambling Vent, so this is not a great spot for us. Huh. I'm actually not sure that there's any way for us to get out of this because of the Obnixilis emblem, and we're going to continue drawing cards with Fevered Visions. We can go ahead and play Chandra, but that's just not good enough. The Fall of the Titans is still stuck in our hand. Trying to think if there's anything that we're missing, but I don't think there is. So we can go ahead and play Chandra, but it's not going to be good enough here, unfortunately. And so, yep, with the Obnixilis emblem and the potential incoming attacks with Shambling Vent, we have no choice, basically, but to concede the game. So that's how it goes sometimes.